Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we will be talking about Gods from the Machine Operation Master Mode, also known as Nightmare Mode. We will be discussing how to tank this operation, more specifically which loadout you should use, which gear, which utilities, which tacticals you should pick. This operation is very demanding, so it requires a proper setup and requires a proper group composition. We will not be covering this today, and we will not be covering which DPS or healer classes you are bringing. This operation is definitely doable with 2 assassin tanks, and I will be covering how do I gear my assassin tank for the roles that I perform in the operation. So the timer, Destruction Carnage, the achievement is called Doom's Delay, is pretty tight. We only get 90 minutes for the hardest operation in game, so it requires quite a lot of planning and you need to optimize a little bit. So I'm fully using the function that was introduced in the last major patch, which is called Loadouts. You can specify several loadouts and you can switch between them in one click of a mouse. I will be showing how I set up my loadouts on my current toon, but before I even go into that, let me show you my cheat sheet which I prepared. It pretty much showcases the 5 bosses, and at a glance you can see which utilities you should pick and which legendaries you can use and which tactical. So this cheat sheet, I just keep it saved, and whenever I set up a new toon, I just import, in a sense, I just copy whatever you see on your screen right now into my character's loadout. So let's talk first of all about gears that I'm using. So first of all, I'm obviously using 339 gear, which is the highest gear currently available. Most of the item pieces are 340 and all legendaries are 334, which is maximum gear level for the legendaries. They are fully augmented and so on. This is not very important. The stats distribution is pretty straightforward. You will see once I equip the gear. In terms of legendaries, I'm currently using 4 of them. The basic one is a force resistant package, just gives you some additional damage reduction. Another recently added final breath package gives you reduces damage taken when you are quite low, so you can be easily healed up. Another very useful legendary is Ballast Point. We'll discuss its applications on 2 different bosses in this video. Pretty much it modifies your deflection so that you don't get knocked, so you can't be knocked while you have deflection up for the first 6 seconds. And last but not least, Second Wind package. It's more of a DPS legendary, but it is extremely useful if you have a large set of adds and you attack at least one of them and it dies. You get healed for 20% of your maximum health. It makes healing, especially on the last boss, much easier, and healers will absolutely love you if you use it well. In terms of tacticals, I'm currently using only 3 different tacticals. One of them is Friend of the Forest, which gives you a guard shroud. You can use shroud on yourself and your guarded person will also be shrouded. It is very useful in certain circumstances. Second tactical I use is Shroud of the Shadow. It increases the duration of your shroud. It consumes your stacks of Dark Ward, and instead of just 3 seconds of shroud, you get like around 8 seconds of shroud. Not very useful, but has its certain applications. Last tactical is 2 Cloaks, which lets you stealth out twice, in a sense, in a shorter period of time. So this tactical will be removed, from what I understand, in the next patch, which will make the operation considerably harder. Probably we will have to use a different tactical to reduce our damage taken. And I guess instead of 2 Cloaks, we will be using the tactical. Let me quickly find it. We will be using Ward of the Continuum, for example. But for now, I'm making the guide for this current patch, so let's see how everything works. So in terms of loadouts, you can have so many loadouts. For gods itself, I'm using 6 of them. As you can see, I have a loadout for each particular boss, and an empty loadout, which makes it easy to swap gear. So, for example, if I were to swap my gear while having Izax loadout equipped, then it would update the loadout with like no gear. Instead, after I'm done raiding, I just switch to the empty loadout, click it, and immediately my gear gets deposited into my inventory. I can easily put it into my legacy bay. So switching between loadouts is very easy. Just one click of a button, and you get your gear up, and all the utilities get applied. Your gear, your tactical, your legendaries, everything gets selected properly. So let's get started. The first boss of the operation is Tyth, and for that boss, let me actually activate this loadout. As you can see, I just clicked one button, and here all my gear is equipped. I have item ratings 339, and all the gear is in place, and the unused pieces are still in my inventory. So I'm using a bit low absorb and a higher shield, as you can see, and the reason is that the Synth tank really likes shielding, especially with Dark Ward up. It increases the shield chance quite significantly. What do we use for Tyth? In terms of legendaries, Force Resistance you use on all fights. It's just your key legendary. You just swap the other one around all the time between bosses. Ballast Point is a very important legendary for this fight because it lets you stay on the edge when the boss is trying to knock you back. You just pop deflection and you don't get knocked off. It is very useful because sometimes, especially when doubles spawn, you have adds on your left, on your right, you don't want to cleave them, so you have to edge the boss, and you stand on the edge. The boss is very close to you. If you were to play like use conventional methods, you would be knocked and probably you would fall to your death. Instead, you just use deflection, and for 6 seconds you are immune to knockback, and it's perfectly fine. In terms of tactical, you pick 2 cloaks. It just helps you stealth out the third knock right before inversion. It doesn't happen at all, doesn't damage you, doesn't damage your team, you don't get knocked, you stay in your position. The caster just doesn't have any effect in general. So having 2 stealth outs makes it so that for every third knock, when you're tanking the boss, you always have a charge of Vanish or like a Stealth Out, Force Cloak. In terms of utilities, there are several important utilities that you take here. First of all, I really like having Lambast, which increases the damage dealt by Lacerate by 25%. It makes it a bit easier to keep the adds on you. Just helps a little bit with the aggro, and you don't really need the other 2 utilities there. Overload is very important, of course, because you can overload the adds before you get pulled in during inversion, so that your co-tank can easily take care of everything. You could also take Depredating Volts AoE, but I don't really feel the need for that. Like, just Lacerate on its own is enough, probably. And all the other utilities are pretty standard. As you can see, most of them will not be changed, like Spike, Overcharge Saber. Fade will be used on 4 bosses out of 5, and also Shroud of Madness is kind of mandatory by default. But for Tyth, the key idea is to use Ballast Point to negate the knockback, to cheese the knockback. And 2 cloaks is also very useful. The next boss we are discussing is Sisters. As you can see, between Tyth and Sisters, I'm changing 1 utility, and I'm changing 1 legendary, 1 tactical, and 1 piece of gear. So first of all, if you notice, I am using final breath package. It's just to decrease damage taken. If I'm suddenly very low, it's very easy to heal me, and I do not need ballast points. There is no knockback, so deflection would be pretty useless for me. The second thing, which is very important, is Friend of the Force. I can guard the healer and shroud during the boss jumping phase, where twice in the fight the boss will jump away and then it will deploy many circles. Also, I can guard shroud a healer in burn, for example, or when the beams are coming from different directions. If for some reason a healer doesn't have a cooldown, they can call out and I will always shroud them. So Friend of the Force is very useful. In terms of utility, nothing shocking. I do not need lacerate damage anymore, so I just switch to obfuscating speed for a bit more movement speed so that I can change positions more quickly when remote access happens. A key consideration is that now we have 2 shield legendaries. And it means our shield is a bit skewed now. We have too much shield and too little absorb. And it is solved by switching out the boots. My default boots are shield boots, but in this loadout and in the next one, I am switching to absorb boots. It is just to compensate back for the stats. The next boss we will be discussing is Nahut. As you can see, not much is changing between Nahut and Sisters in terms of utilities. The only major change is 2 cloaks. 2 cloaks is a very useful tactical, especially in burn. You can cheese several slashes in a row. It's you just cancel the slash and you retaunt the boss, and it's perfectly fine. In terms of legendaries, you still use the final breath package, which means you have to use absorb boots just for damage reduction if you are suddenly very low. And there is not much to say. There is nothing else that you really cheese in this fight except for using 2 cloaks. The fight will become a little bit tougher when 2 cloaks gets removed, so you will have to play a bit more carefully. You won't have such a luxury of shrouding one slash, then like stealthing twice in a row, and then probably your shroud will already be back up. Now you will have to play more carefully or like be healed a bit more. But for now, 2 cloaks is by far the best tactical in this fight. The next boss we'll be talking about is Scyva. And Scyva is a bit of an interesting boss in that regard because the 2 tanks are doing different roles. There will be a tank that is holding the boss mostly in the latter stages of the fight, and there will be a tank who is mostly doing turret, and I am doing turrets. This is my role. So my legendaries are kind of tailored for that specific purpose. How do I achieve my desired goals? First of all, if you can see, Final Breath legendary is gone. We are back to using ballast point, which means the boots are shield boots to maintain our stat distribution. So why do I use ballast point? Frequently in the fight I will have to take the turret, and the turret shot knocks you back, especially after the first ignite core, when the group is very tightly positioned together. If I were to take the turret, and the turret would knock me first with the first shot, then the second shot would be blocked by a DPS or my co-tank or even a healer, and it could have some very dramatic consequences. So instead I just pop deflection when I take the turret, and I am immune for the first 2 shots in terms of knockback. The turret doesn't knock me back, and after that I am already in position to play the turret, to body block it properly, and so on. You could probably play without ballast point, just it makes the fight much easier and much more reliable in a sense. When you know you can't afford to be knocked back, you just use deflection. Tactical choice is a bit tricky here. You can honestly go with any tactical and it will be perfectly fine. I personally prefer Shroud of a Shadow because I personally struggle a little bit with the first stage. When the Omega Protocol droid is casting a green beam on me, I don't feel like running away or something. For me, it's much easier to just use Shroud, and because it's a long Shroud, it will consume the stacks of my Dark Ward, it will last longer, and instead I can just chill and keep damaging the Omega Protocol droid instead of just running away. This is probably the only reason why long shroud is good. The other reason would be at some point when I have to body block the turret shots, the turret will knock me back and I will probably land in purple, in a purple floor, or purple like AoE on the ground, so that I don't die. Shroud completely negates that damage, so it's just very easy to pre-pop the shroud, and it will last long enough for you to get out of purple without taking any damage. Utilities are still absolutely the same, nothing changes. There is not much you gain by switching to any other utilities. The last boss, for which the changes are probably the most dramatic, would be Izax. First of all, as you can see, I am not using ballast point package anymore. Instead, I am switching to second wind package. And the reason is very straightforward. I am just damaging the ads during the Hull Cutter phase, and honestly during all the phases I am damaging something and I'm constantly being healed, but the biggest role is during the Hull Cutter phase and during P5, like right before burn. I constantly have a ton of ads on me and they will eventually die. In P5, during the Hull Cutter phase, I am tanking a lot of damage from the boss. The boss is constantly attacking me, and the group is killing the ads. So while I'm running around, I can just overload the ads for free. It won't disrupt anything, but since overload does a little bit of damage, it counts as if I attacked the ads and contributed to the ads dying. So once the ad dies, I get healed for 20% once every 8 seconds. It is very useful and relieves a lot of burden from the healers, so they can just focus on healing the group. Of course, I will still require healing, but being healed for 20% of my entire health is super useful. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is a friend of the force again. Guard Shroud is rather helpful. You can do without it, it's perfectly doable, but in P2, when there is an explosion happening, it's just so easy to shroud your healer so that the healer doesn't take damage from the explosion. You could ask them to God Bubble or pop some big cooldown or something, or just heal themselves, but the group will require some healing in this stage, and it's just easier to relieve the burden from healers. Also, you can shroud people when they have induction. Especially when the person gets several inductions in a row, they might not have enough cooldowns or they might struggle a little bit. So if induction happens, you can just shroud them. And also in P5, while the boss is being, while Scyva is being dragged around, you can also shroud Scyva if for some reason maybe your DPS made a mistake or something. Maybe an explosion is happening on top of Scyva and you want to shroud her so that you negate the damage. It's also perfectly doable. So Friend of the Force is by far the most useful tactical in this fight. In terms of utilities, this fight is one where you actually change a bit. Because Depredating Walls should be played as AoE. AoE version. The skill arcs to nearby enemies, and it really helps in P5 because in the beginning of P5 you are stunned for quite a while the first tether is stunning you. It takes quite a while for you to regain aggro on the existing ads that already spawned. So AoE Depredating Walls is a very useful thing, a very useful utility which helps you keep hold aggro on all the ads at once, and you will mostly concentrate on grabbing the new spawning ads while holding aggro on the existing ones using AoE Depredating Walls. Another important utility for Izax is Formless Phantom reduces all damage taken while stunned by 30%, because at some point in the fight you will be taunting several Tether droids, and they all will stun you, and they deal quite a bit of damage. If something goes wrong, if the healers are busy or something like that, you might even die. So this utility is extremely useful. You don't really need to reduce the cooldown of Force Cloak. You're not cloaking anything in this fight. Instead, you just reduce all the damage taken while stunned by 30%, and your healers have a very easy time like healing you, especially if you can combine it with Overcharged Saber at some point. I usually do it on the second set of tethers that I take. I usually use Overcharged Saber, and in combination with this utility, it makes the phase extremely smooth. Also, of course, Overload is very useful still. I mean, I'm using Overload on all fights, but in this fight in particular, it's very useful because, again, I overload the ads during the Hull Cutter phase, and I just get healed for free. It's a very cheap way to effectively reduce your DPS or like increase your self heals in a certain way. So makes the fight much smoother. I think that's pretty much it. You are still using the shield boots. You are losing a bit of absorb because you are not using a ballast point. Instead, you're using second wind package. So you get a little bit of alacrity, but you are losing a little bit of absorb. I'm also augmenting. I augmented it for absorb, so to compensate a little bit for that loss. But it's nothing important. Your main characteristic, your main stat is the shield. So this is how my setup basically works. There are 6 different loadouts. I can switch between them in one click of a button, and it makes it very easy to switch between toons and deposit all my gear into the legacy bay. So I hope it was helpful for you. Please feel free to comment or ask questions. I'm also always open, like on Discord, if you want to ask anything. Feel free to use my cheat sheet. I made it primarily for myself, but I would be very happy if it helps you with this challenging operation. And I guess see you next time.